The flashing red and blue lights were supposed to mean safety, but on a lonely stretch of Virginia highway, they signaled the beginning of a nightmare. A decorated Navy officer in pristine dress whites was forced to the pavement. He warned them. They didn't listen. Then the Pentagon intervened. The morning sun over Fairfax County, Virginia, was already relentlessly bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 1. Inside the air-conditioned cabin of his modest Ford Fusion, Lieutenant Commander Julian Hale checked the rearview mirror, adjusting the collar of his pristine service-dress white uniform. Every crease was sharp enough to cut paper, the ribbons on his left breast representing multiple deployments, a Navy Commendation Medal, and a Bronze Star earned in the dusty outskirts of Fallujah gleamed under the passing streetlights. Julian was minutes away from the Pentagon. Secured on the passenger seat beside him was a matte black biometric locked briefcase. It did not contain standard paperwork. Inside rested a level 4 encrypted drive containing actionable, time-sensitive intelligence regarding a compromised naval blockade in the South China Sea. Admiral Harlan Voss, the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare, was waiting in a secure subterranean briefing room. The clock was ticking. Julian signaled to merge into the left lane, driving precisely at the posted speed limit. He was a man composed of discipline, raised in a strict household in Atlanta, refined by the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and hardened by 3 combat tours. He did not speed, he did not swerve. Suddenly, the unmistakable strobe of red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror. Julian frowned, his eyes flicking to the speedometer. He checked his mirrors, assuming the police cruiser needed to pass him to respond to an emergency. He signaled and smoothly transitioned to the right lane to yield. The cruiser violently swerved behind him, riding his bumper so closely that Julian could see the aggressive grill guard filling his mirror. The siren gave a short, angry burst, a clear command to pull over. Maintaining his calm, Julian activated his right turn signal and guided his vehicle onto the gravel shoulder, stopping entirely clear of the traffic lane. He shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down the driver's side window. Following standard military protocol and common sense, he placed both hands squarely at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. He waited. In the side mirror, Julian watched the door of the patrol car swing open. Out stepped Officer Blaine Mercer. Mercer was a broad-shouldered man with a tight buzz cut, wearing dark aviator sunglasses that masked his eyes. His posture radiated an unearned arrogance. His right hand already rested casually on the butt of his holstered service weapon as he approached the vehicle. "Morning, officer," Julian said, his voice deep, resonant, and entirely steady. Mercer stopped just behind the driver's door pillar, keeping himself deliberately out of Julian's direct line of sight, a standard, albeit aggressive, tactical position. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Mercer demanded. His tone was not inquisitive. It was accusatory, dripping with immediate hostility. "I cannot say that I do, officer. I was maintaining the speed limit and staying within my lane," Julian replied, looking straight ahead, but projecting his voice clearly over his shoulder. "You crossed the solid yellow line back by the overpass," Mercer lied smoothly, "and your vehicle matches the description of a sedan involved in a robbery 2 counties over." Julian's jaw tightened imperceptibly. A Ford Fusion was the most common vehicle on the eastern seaboard, but the accusation of crossing the yellow line was a complete fabrication. Still, his training dictated de-escalation. "I assure you, officer, I have been nowhere near any such incident. I am on my way to a highly classified briefing at the Pentagon." Mercer scoffed, stepping closer to the window and leaning in, bringing with him the scent of stale coffee and peppermint gum. He lowered his sunglasses, his eyes raking over Julian's immaculate white uniform, the gold shoulder boards, the gleaming buttons. Mercer's lip curled into a sneer. "Right, the Pentagon," Mercer mocked. "And I'm the President of the United States. Nice costume, buddy. Stolen valor is a federal offense, you know that? Who wears an admiral suit to drive a cheap Ford?" "I am a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy," Julian stated, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the unmistakable timbre of a commanding officer. "My name is Julian Hale. If you need my identification, my driver's license and my common access card are in my wallet, located in my breast pocket. I am requesting your permission to reach for them." Mercer's hand gripped his duty belt tightly. "I didn't tell you to reach for anything. Keep your hands where I can see them." "My hands are on the wheel, officer." "Don't get smart with me, boy." Mercer snapped, the derogatory word hanging in the humid Virginia air like a foul odor. The underlying racial prejudice was no longer a subtext. It was glaringly obvious. Julian was a black man in a high-ranking military uniform, and Mercer had clearly decided before even stepping out of his cruiser that Julian did not belong in it. "I am not attempting to be smart," Julian said, maintaining his iron discipline. He knew that any sudden movement, any flash of righteous anger, could be weaponized against him. "I am simply trying to comply with your directives while informing you of my time-sensitive military obligations." "Shut up," Mercer barked. He keyed the radio microphone on his shoulder. "Unit 41 to dispatch. I've got a non-compliant suspect on Route 1 south of the county line. Send backup." Suspect is wearing some kind of fake military getup. Might be a sovereign citizen or a mental case. Julian closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Non-compliant. The word was a legal shield for police brutality, a blank check for whatever Mercer planned to do next. Early in the morning, Admiral Voss would be expecting him to walk through the security checkpoint soon. "Officer Mercer," Julian read the nameplate on the man's chest. "I strongly advise you to contact the Department of Defense liaison if you intend to detain me. My commanding officers will verify my identity immediately." "I told you to shut your mouth," Mercer yelled, unfastening the retention strap on his holster. "You speak when spoken to." Moments later, a second patrol cruiser skidded onto the gravel shoulder behind Mercer's vehicle, kicking up a cloud of white dust that drifted over Julian's car. Officer Gage Thornton jumped out. Thornton was younger, looking slightly frantic as he jogged up to Mercer with his hand resting on his taser. "What do we got, Mitch?" Thornton asked, his eyes darting to Julian in the driver's seat. "Got a live one, refusing to identify, making bizarre claims about the Pentagon, wearing a stolen uniform," Mercer replied, his narrative already completely detached from reality. Thornton looked at the crisp white uniform and the intricate rack of medals. A flicker of hesitation crossed his young face. "Mitch, that uniform looks pretty real. You sure?" "I said he's non-compliant, Paul," Mercer barked, completely shutting down his rookie partner. Mercer turned back to Julian's window. "Step out of the vehicle now, with your hands in the air." Julian knew the danger of this moment. A dark highway shoulder, two armed officers, one of them operating on a dangerous cocktail of adrenaline, ego, and prejudice. "I am stepping out of the vehicle," Julian announced slowly. He unbuckled his seatbelt with deliberate, exaggerated slowness, keeping his left hand firmly on the wheel. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the crushing Virginia heat. At 6'2", Julian towered over Mercer, but he immediately slumped his shoulders slightly and raised his empty hands, fingers splayed wide. "Turn around and face the car," Mercer ordered, drawing his handcuffs. "Officer," Julian said, his voice projecting the calm authority of a man who had negotiated with hostile informants in active war zones, "you are making a catastrophic mistake. If I do not arrive at my briefing, a federal response protocol will be triggered." "Face the damn car." Mercer lunged forward, grabbing Julian's pristine white shoulder board and violently spinning him around. The rough maneuver slammed Julian's chest against the dusty roof of the Ford Fusion. The abrasive dirt immediately stained the immaculate white fabric of his uniform. Julian bit the inside of his cheek to suppress a gasp of pain as Mercer kicked his legs apart and yanked his arms behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit brutally into Julian's wrists, ratcheted entirely too tight. The metal pinched his skin, cutting off the circulation. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, impersonating a military officer, and resisting arrest," Mercer panted, clearly enjoying the physical dominance. Thornton stood by, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Should I search the car, Mitch?" "Yeah, tear it apart. Let's see what this fake admiral's hiding," Mercer sneered, dragging Julian backward away from the vehicle. As Thornton opened the passenger door, his eyes fell immediately on the matte black briefcase. He reached out and grabbed the handle, hauling it out of the car. It was incredibly heavy. "Don't touch that," Julian's voice sliced through the air like a whip. It wasn't a request. It was a lethal warning. "That is the property of the United States Department of Defense. It contains classified level 4 intelligence. You do not have the security clearance to handle it." Thornton froze, holding the briefcase awkwardly by his side. He looked at the biometric thumb pad and the lack of any keyhole or standard latches. Mitch, this thing looks serious. It's got government warning labels all over the bottom. Property of naval intelligence." Mercer laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He shoved Julian into the back of his cruiser, slamming the door shut with unnecessary force. He walked over to Thornton and snatched the briefcase from his hands. "You buy these stickers online for $5, Paul. Stop being a coward. Let's pop this thing open. Probably full of stolen credit cards or drugs." From the backseat of the cruiser, through the cage, Julian watched in sheer disbelief as Mercer placed the highly sensitive briefcase on the hood of the police car. Mercer pulled a heavy tactical folding knife from his pocket and flicked it open. "Officer Mercer, do not attempt to breach that case," Julian shouted through the thick plexiglass divider, his military bearing finally giving way to genuine alarm. "It is equipped with a tamper response system." Mercer couldn't hear him through the glass, or simply didn't care. He jammed the thick blade of his knife into the micro-seam of the briefcase and violently twisted it. The briefcase did not open, but deep within its titanium-reinforced shell, a microscopic sensor detected the forced entry attempt. Instantly, an encrypted silent distress beacon was beamed directly to a military satellite orbiting high above the Earth, which relayed the signal down to the National Military Command Center inside the Pentagon. The signal contained 3 pieces of data: the exact GPS coordinates of the case, the badge number of the commanding officer assigned to it, and a Level 1 breach alert. Blissfully unaware that he had just triggered a national security incident, Mercer cursed, pulling his bent knife away. "Damn thing is stuck tight. Throw it in the trunk, Paul. We'll let the boys at the precinct pry it open with a crowbar." Thornton swallowed hard, gently placing the briefcase into the trunk of the cruiser. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped on a landmine. The ride to the local municipal precinct was short. Julian sat in the back, his hands completely numb, his white uniform covered in dark grease and dirt from the hood of his car. He did not say another word. There was no point. The machine had been set in motion. When they hauled him into the station, the precinct was bustling with the morning shift change. Sergeant Everett Lang, a veteran with a graying mustache, was working the booking desk. When Mercer shoved Julian through the double doors, the entire room seemed to go quiet. Officers stopped drinking their coffee. Several civilian clerks stared. It wasn't every day. A man in a bloody, dirt-stained navy dress, white uniform was paraded in handcuffs. Sergeant Lang stood up slowly, leaning over the high desk. He had served years in the Marine Corps before joining the police force. He knew what those ribbons on Julian's chest meant. "Mercer," Lang said slowly, his voice laced with dread. "What the hell is this?" "Got a stolen Valor case, Sarge. Refused to ID, resisted arrest. Had this sketchy locked case in his car. We need maintenance to bring up a crowbar so we can inventory it," Mercer declared proudly, slamming the biometric briefcase onto the booking desk. Lang looked at the briefcase. He saw the DOD property engraving. Then he looked at Julian's eyes. Julian's gaze was ice cold, completely devoid of fear. It was the look of an apex predator patiently waiting for the trap to spring. "Sergeant," Julian said quietly, his voice carrying perfectly across the silent room, "check your dispatch computer. I imagine you're about to receive a phone call." The silence inside the municipal police precinct was suffocating. Sergeant Everett Lang did not move his eyes from the matte black briefcase resting on his booking desk. He recognized the laser-etched insignia on the titanium casing, the official seal of the Department of the Navy, bordered by the unmistakable stark warnings of a Level 4 classified asset. Lang had seen similar markings during his deployments. "You did not touch these items unless you had clearance that went all the way up to the Oval Office." "Mercer," Lang repeated, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room's absolute stillness. "Where'd you get this?" "I told you, Sarge," Officer Blaine Mercer replied, leaning against the counter and crossing his arms, completely oblivious to the radioactive nature of the situation he had just created. "It was on the passenger seat of this guy's Ford. He's dressed like an admiral for Halloween and running his mouth about federal protocols. He's probably a sovereign citizen moving contraband. I tried to pop the case open on the hood of the cruiser, but the lock is jammed. Call maintenance. Tell them to bring the heavy bolt cutters." Lang's face drained of all color. He looked from the scratched microseam on the briefcase, where Mercer had foolishly wedged his knife, to Lieutenant Commander Julian Hale. Julian was standing tall despite the tight steel cuffs biting into his wrists. His soiled service dress white uniform still radiated an undeniable aura of authority. "You tried to force this open?" Lang asked, his voice trembling slightly. Before Mercer could answer with another arrogant remark, The precinct's primary dispatch console erupted. It wasn't the standard digital chime for a 911 call. It was a harsh, continuous, blaring klaxon that made every officer in the room flinch. The 3 computer monitors behind the desk simultaneously flashed from their standard dispatch grids to a solid, glaring red screen. A single line of bold white text appeared across all the monitors. Federal override. Secure facility. Hold all traffic. What the hell is wrong with the system? Mercer muttered, finally standing up straight, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. Did we get hacked? The precinct's main line phone began to ring. It wasn't a regular ringtone. It was the emergency line reserved for the mayor's office and state-level crises. Lang picked up the heavy receiver slowly. Sergeant Lang. He didn't speak again. He just listened. The blood completely vanished from the veteran sergeant's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward Julian, then to the briefcase, and finally to Mercer. "Yes, sir," Lang whispered into the phone. "Yes, Director. He is here. The package is here. Understood. We will not interfere." Lang hung up the phone. His hand was shaking. He looked at Mercer with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "Blaine," Lang said, his voice cracking, "what have you done?" "What are you talking about? Who was on the phone?" Mercer demanded, taking a step forward. "That was the director of the FBI's Washington field office." Lang breathed out, the words feeling heavy in the air. "He was patching through a direct relay from the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon." Outside, the distant rhythmic thumping of heavy rotor blades began to vibrate the thin glass of the precinct windows. It grew louder by the second, shifting from a low hum to a deafening roar. Officer Gage Thornton, who had been standing quietly in the corner, ran to the front windows and peered through the blinds. "Blaine?" Thornton yelled over the noise, his voice panicked. "Blaine, there's a Black Hawk helicopter touching down in the grocery store parking lot across the street." "What?" Mercer shoved past his partner and looked out the window. It wasn't just a helicopter. 3 unmarked, heavily armored black SUVs were currently smashing through the precinct's front security gate, their tires squealing as they skidded to a halt directly in front of the main entrance. The doors of the SUVs flew open simultaneously. More than a dozen heavily armed men flooded out. They were not local SWAT. They wore dark tactical gear with no police markings. Armed with compact assault rifles, their faces grim and intensely focused. Leading the pack was a tall, imposing man in a sharp charcoal suit holding a gold badge high in the air. "Breach the doors. Secure the package. Secure the asset." A voice boomed from a tactical megaphone outside. Before Mercer could even reach for his radio, the front double doors of the precinct were violently thrown open, crashing against the drywall. The heavily armed tactical unit swarmed into the lobby, fanning out with terrifying practiced precision. Within seconds, every local police officer in the room had a red laser dot resting on their chest. "Hands away from your weapons. Step back from the desk," shouted one of the tactical operators, his rifle trained directly on Mercer. The man in the charcoal suit strode through the shattered entryway, his polished shoes crunching on the broken glass. He was Special Agent Ronan Pierce, one of the highest-ranking investigators for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS. His eyes scanned the room, instantly locking onto the matte black briefcase on the desk, and then shifting to Julian, who was still handcuffed and covered in dirt. Pierce's expression darkened into a storm of absolute fury. He walked straight up to Mercer, invading his personal space, completely ignoring the local officer's badge. "Who is the commanding officer of this precinct?" Pierce demanded, his voice dangerously low. Our captain isn't here yet," Mercer stammered, his previous arrogance entirely evaporating in the face of an overwhelming federal military presence. "I'm the arresting officer." "Who the hell are you people? You have no jurisdiction here." Pierce pulled a pair of heavy steel bolt cutters from a tactical bag carried by one of his men. He slammed them onto the counter right next to the classified briefcase. "I am Special Agent Ronan Pierce with NCIS. The men holding rifles to your chest are Naval Security Group operatives," Pierce stated coldly. "And you, officer, have just committed a federal felony by detaining a high-ranking naval officer, assaulting him, and attempting to breach a Level 4 classified intelligence asset. The jurisdiction of the United States Department of Defense supersedes your county badge. Now take those handcuffs off the lieutenant commander, or I will have my men cut them off, and then I will use them on you." The precinct was frozen in absolute terror. Local cops stood with their hands raised, realizing they had unwittingly been dragged into a massive national security crisis. Officer Thornton was openly shaking, pressing himself against the wall, wishing he could disappear. Mercer's hands trembled as he reached for his duty belt, pulling out the small silver key. He stepped behind Julian, his breathing ragged and shallow. With a loud click, the heavy cuffs snapped open. Julian Hale did not rub his wrists. He did not massage the deep red grooves cut into his skin. He maintained his impeccable military bearing, rolling his shoulders back and turning slowly to face Mercer. The sheer presence of the naval officer, even in a ruined uniform, made Mercer shrink backward. "Lieutenant Commander Hale, sir," Agent Pierce said, his tone shifting immediately to one of deep respect. "Are you injured? Do we need a corpsman?" "I am uninjured, Agent Pierce," Julian replied, his voice a steady, calm baritone that completely controlled the room. "However, my timeline has been severely compromised. Admiral Voss is expecting this intelligence. We have a convoy ready outside, sir, and a rotary wing on standby across the street. We can have you at the Pentagon quickly," Pierce confirmed, picking up the briefcase with extreme care. Julian nodded. He turned his gaze to Sergeant Lang. "Sergeant, I suggest you preserve all body camera footage, dash cam footage, and radio dispatch logs from this morning. You're going to need them." Lang swallowed hard and nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." Julian then looked at Mercer. Mercer was sweating profusely, his face pale, his eyes darting toward the exits as if calculating a way to escape a room full of federal operatives. "Officer Mercer," Julian said softly, stepping closer. The silence in the room amplified every word. "You assumed I was a criminal because of the color of my skin. You assumed my uniform was a costume because your prejudice blinded you to the reality that someone who looks like me could outrank you in every conceivable metric. You lied about a traffic violation. You fabricated a connection to a robbery. You assaulted me, and you attempted to destroy government property." "I was just doing my job," Mercer croaked, a pathetic, desperate lie. "You matched a description." "That is a lie," Officer Thornton suddenly blurted out from the corner. Everyone turned to look at the rookie. Thornton was crying, tears tracking through the dust on his face. "It's a lie, Blaine. Dispatch caught the robbery suspect an hour before our shift started. You knew that. You just saw him driving and said you wanted to teach this guy a lesson about driving a nice car in our county." Mercer whipped his head around, his eyes burning with betrayal. "Shut your mouth, Paul." "No," Thornton sobbed. "I'm not going to federal prison for you, Blaine. He didn't cross the yellow line. He didn't do anything wrong. You just attacked him." Pierce nodded slowly, a predatory smile touching the corner of his lips. He turned to two of his heavily armed tactical operators. "Take his badge, take his weapon." Before Mercer could protest, two massive military operatives grabbed his arms, pinning them behind his back with the exact same brutal force Mercer had used on Julian. They stripped him of his gun, his taser, and his radio. "Blaine Mercer," Pierce said, pulling a fresh set of handcuffs from his own belt. "You are under arrest by the authority of the federal government. You are charged with the assault of a military officer, unlawful detainment, deprivation of rights under color of law, and attempted espionage for attempting to breach a classified military asset. You will not be going to a county jail. You will be held in a federal detention center pending a military tribunal review." The clack of the handcuffs locking around Mercer's wrists echoed through the silent precinct. The bully had been utterly broken, his career destroyed in moments. "Let's move, Commander," Pierce said, gesturing toward the doors. Julian walked out of the precinct, the heavy glass doors held open by federal agents. The Virginia sun was still shining brightly. He climbed into the back of the armored SUV, the classified briefcase resting safely beside him. Sirens wailed, not to pull him over, but to clear the highway entirely. State troopers had shut down the entire northbound lane of Route 1, creating a private high-speed corridor straight to the Pentagon. Shortly after, deep within the subterranean, heavily fortified briefing rooms of the Pentagon, Julian stood before Admiral Harlan Voss. Despite the dirt and grease permanently stained into his white uniform, Julian stood at strict attention, saluting his superior. "At ease, Commander," Admiral Voss said, returning the salute, his eyes taking in Julian's ruined uniform and bruised wrists. "I was informed of the situation at the local precinct. Your discipline under pressure is exactly why I trusted you with this asset. Are you all right, Julian?" "I am perfectly fine, Admiral. The package is secure," Julian replied, placing the briefcase on the steel briefing table and pressing his thumb to the biometric scanner. The case hissed open, revealing the encrypted drive. Good man, Voss said, plugging the drive into the secure terminal. Because of your restraint today, we are going to intercept a hostile fleet movement before they even know we see them. As for the local police department, I believe the Department of Justice is currently dismantling their command structure as we speak. Julian nodded slowly. He didn't feel triumph over Mercer's arrest. He only felt a solemn sense of duty. The intelligence was delivered. The fleet was safe. In the aftermath, the story would barely make a blip in the local news, buried under layers of federal redactions. But inside the Pentagon, Lieutenant Commander Julian Hale was quietly awarded a meritorious promotion. Meanwhile, Blaine Mercer was sentenced to a lengthy term in a federal penitentiary. His badge melted down, his authority permanently revoked by the very government he thought he was protecting. This chilling true story proves that true authority doesn't need to shout, and justice always catches up to those who abuse their power. Lieutenant Commander Hale's incredible composure in the face of blatant ignorance saved a critical national security mission and exposed a corrupt officer. If you were on the edge of your seat during this intense military showdown, make sure to hit that like button, share this incredible story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping real-life dramas.